I could literally drop area triggers here, see how long people might be staring at my signs here, or my signs here, or my leaderboards here. So I could drop a little trigger in this area and be able to track the amount of time people are spending in front of these. Let's get started. So this is a build along. This is building smarter worlds with TurboAnalytics with myself, SeeingBlue. So today's agenda. We're just going to briefly go over why analytics matter. What are they? How can we use them? How can it benefit me, right? That sort of thing. We're going to then kind of discuss the core API components of the TurboAnalytics API. I understand there are some, and I may say this a couple of times, but I'll take a moment to kind of start saying it now. There are some assets out there that were released with the TurboAnalytics to kind of help you start using the package right out the gate without having to do a whole lot of heavy lifting, really. But the purpose of my build along today wasn't like to teach you how to use those tools. They're already there kind of for you to do your own self-learning, self-paced learning. Today, I actually want to break down the TurboAnalytics API into something that maybe doesn't seem so daunting, and then start writing our own or implementing our own analytics manually without using any pre-existing assets. It's not going to be terrible, I don't think. We'll see, because we're also just doing this live as well, and so there's the whole aspect of today's workshop. But yeah, we'll talk about how to set up our own custom analytics manager. We'll do a live demo, and of course, take any questions. So why analytics matter? Why do I need it? What can it do for me? So of course, analytics provides feedback for understanding users' behavior in our worlds. So this is going to drive intelligent and informed improvements that we'll make to our worlds. So the idea here is to look at your world and you're going to have some kind of idea of what you want to see in your world, what kind of data you want to get out of your worlds based on your users' behavior. And analytics is going to help us to get that data out. And we're going to talk about the different tools today that kind of help you organize that data, essentially. So it's instrumental in improving player retention by identifying and allowing us to rectify points of friction, areas that players enjoy or get stuck, and exit the world prematurely by measuring completion rates and player success. And it allows for the precise balancing of gameplay mechanics, such as the difficulty of a puzzle or the power of a specific weapon. It's going to tell us things like, do players prefer one area of the map over another area? Do they prefer one weapon over another weapon? Is one weapon dealing more damage than the other weapons in our world? How many people are discovering our secrets or our Easter eggs that we hide in the world? How often is that being found? So those sort of things are the stuff that we'll be able to get back through the analytics. That's what makes it super useful. And it really helps us through an iterative process. It'll help us over time to really fine tune our worlds and their mechanics. So we're going to just go ahead and dive right into the technical stuff. So we're going to talk about this a little bit, and then we're going to see it in action. And so we'll do the boring stuff, eat our vegetables first, and then we'll get to have our dessert later. With all of the APIs, they've all got essentially a toggle that needs to be turned on and also imported into your scripts in order to use. The Horizon Analytics is no different. So, the library itself is the fundamental layer of the system. It exposes the necessary classes and methods and event types to our scripts. We're kind of familiar with that from other API libraries we've used. But this one has something called turbo variables, or a turbo variable. So this is the primary interface for interacting with the analytics engine. It essentially comes with two methods that we're going to use the most. There's turbo.register, which initializes the system for us. We'll only do that one time in our scripts, or really in our world entirely. But the second one, the most common one that we'll be using, is turbo.send. So this literally takes the information that we've gathered on our players and actually sends it to the analytics system, transmits all of that data that we've collected. So turbo register we use one time, turbo send we're going to be using constantly to get that information stored for us. And as far as the information that we're sending, we have a handful of what they call turbo event variables. So these are things like on area enter, on area exit, on level up, on task start, on task end, on discovery made, on damage. There's a handful of them, and we'll take a look at them, and then we'll pick a few of them and try to implement them into a world today. But the events are essentially things that common actions that take place in our world that we might want to log and see how often they're actually executing on a day-to-day basis, or what percentage of our players are doing a certain action on a day-to-day basis. And then each one of those turbo events also has a payload type alias. And so the on area enter, the on level up, they each have their own, what we're just going to recall or refer to as a payload. It's an object of data, essentially, that we're going to be submitting to the analytics engine. So that's it, really. 4 parts. The first one isn't really, I don't hardly consider it a part, but you've got your turbo variable, your turbo events, and your turbo payloads. And those 3 things is what we're going to be using today to essentially track things happening in our world. We're going to take a look at the setup process for getting started from scratch, essentially. So let's go ahead, get started with our live demo, right? So let's go ahead and get the setup process out of the way. And then once the setup is done, we can take a look at some of the events that we can listen to with our setup. So I'm already kind of logged into a world of mine. And I do have some scripts here. I've already been experimenting. I actually have never implemented analytics into this particular world. So I thought it would be a good idea to come in here and see where we could potentially add analytics and see what that kind of looks like. So first thing we want to do is just make sure the analytics API is turned on. I think it actually stays turned on by default, but if we go into the scripts drop down at the top of the desktop editor, click the gear cog and under the scripts window, and then click on API in the script settings. You're going to have a list of all the APIs in your world. Some will be on, some will be off, but by default, I think analytics is on, but just come in here and double check that that's toggled over to the right there. So once that is enabled, we want to create a new script. So what we're going to do is essentially create a manager that's going to handle all of the analytics events that are occurring in our world. So the analytic events will be triggered by other scripts throughout our world, but we might not want to send the turbo event like directly from that script. We might want to save that for an analytics manager to handle. So what we'll do is from the various scripts in our world, we'll just send a broadcast, and our analytics manager will be set up to hear that broadcast, and then it can do the things it needs to do to get the information over to the server, the analytics engine. So click your new script button, call it Analytics Manager if you want. Makes the most sense to me. But let's open this script up and take a look at it. Now, there's quite a bit I've got here already, but we're going to ignore most of it at first. Let me get zoomed in here so we can kind of focus. And so one of the first things we're going to need to do is implement or import some of the Horizon Analytics API. And the first thing you're going to want the turbo. You're going to want the turbo settings, and you're going to want the turbo events, and you're going to want probably the default settings as well. So these are the 4 main things you're going to want to import from the analytics. As you start to listen for different events, you may also need to import the payloads for those events. Probably not going to know what all of them are right now, but we'll start going over them here in just a moment. I did create some events in my script. So these are for the broadcast that some of my other scripts in the world will be sending later on. Actually, I want to open my folder. Here we go. All right, back to where we were. But we'll kind of skip over this for now. We're not quite ready to talk about events just yet. I want to jump down into this first constant that I've created. So I created a constant variable just outside of the class here called turbo settings. Because when we're sending or when we're registering our turbo engine, it's got some initial settings that needs to be, well, set. So that's what we're doing here. We don't necessarily have to create a variable for this. We could have just used the turbo default settings, but if we want to make changes to those, this is the best way to do it, in my opinion. Just create a constant, define it as the turbo settings type. If you hover over the type, actually there's not as much here to read as I thought, so not that useful. But we're automatically basically like copying over the default settings. And so hovering over this default settings is going to be kind of useful for a moment because we can scroll down through here and this is going to tell us some pretty useful things about our world and the stuff that's going to get reported. There's some default settings here. Most of these we're not going to mess with right away. But as we start to look at these, we're going to start thinking in our head, what sounds like something my world could utilize? Does my world have game modes? If it does, game mode might be a setting that I might want to look in configuring at some point. Am I interested in tracking area data in my world? If so, the player initial area and the initial state, I think, kind of relates to game mode. But the initial area is when a player joins my world, like where are they initially landing? What I title that. It's usually a lobby or something along those lines, depending on what kind of world you've got. Most of these others you won't really change, like the heartbeat frequency. You won't really change the turbo update unless you have a specific reason for doing so. We're not going to mess with those in today's workshop. But I do want to keep scrolling here because there are a collection of these settings that are set true by default, and then there's a collection of them that are set to false. So they're not by default, they're not being used. But if we look at what is used by default, use AFK. So this is going to be one that basically tracks when players are essentially away from the keyboard, which could impact gameplay. So if you think that you might want to know how often that's happening in your world, this is something you might want to leave enabled. If it's something you don't care about, you're going to want to disable it. You don't want the engine doing things that you don't really care about. That's extra resource usages that you can save. Discovery. Discovery is one of these things that basically it's kind of a catch-all for any time a player discovers a thing, whether it's an Easter egg. I think pretty much anything that they can happen up on, or anything that they can discover, essentially. For some reason, I'm running out of ideas for what, but we'll talk about some examples of it as well. Discoveries is probably something you'll use in most worlds, though. It's pretty staple feature of the analytics. Friction is another one I would say is pretty staple feature of the analytics. So friction is anytime something potentially negative happens to a player. It could be that they fail out of the world. That would be a friction hit. It could be something that another player has done that caused friction for other players. It could be something that is intentional. Maybe the difficulty steps up a notch. So that's potential friction. And so maybe you want to log these in your world for when these events happen. Keep tabs on how often they're occurring. And I believe there's probably may even be some logic potentially related to what effect it actually does have on players. Because one thing you'll learn as you start enabling these and you start using these different features, as the data starts to appear in your graphs under insights, you're going to see a lot of it kind of collaborates together. Trying to think of an example off the top of my head. For example, if I'm tracking which area of a world that a player is spending the most time in, if I have things like game mode turned on, then I could also tell like how often they're spending time in this world when they're in a certain game mode. So like you can start to kind of compare two different data points together. So a lot of these do kind of work hand in hand. The use of game mode, if that's something you plan on using, you turn this on or off, the use of heartbeats. I don't know if I have immediate definition of heartbeats. I know I have it somewhere, but we'll keep going on here. The use of level up. So if there's any sort of leveling up happening in your world or any sort of progression, maybe you're not calling it levels, maybe you're calling it something else, but you could still use the level up. You can still use that to track that. Use quests. So anytime a player completes a quest, you want to log that kind of stuff. If you don't, turn these off. And then rewards, these are anytime the player earns a thing, whether they're earning currency, they're earning experience. Use rewards could be a way that, we track how often that happens in a world. These settings are set false by default. So everything from here down, we have to enable if we want to use. So like if we have abilities in our world, if we have armors, if our players are taking any kind of damage, For some reason, if we want the player's forward information, if we want friction after so long and there's no like KO events in our world, we want to log that sort of thing. We want to log the players' rotations. Maybe there's a reason in your world you want all your players facing the same direction. You want to see how often maybe they're not doing that. I don't know what the exact use case for that would be, but it's there if you can come up with it. If your world uses rounds, if it's a round-based gameplay, we've got rounds. If there's sections that the players have to kind of move through, we've got sections or stages or tasks. And so at the end of the day, all of these are really just names for putting data on putting a plot on a graph, right? So pinning some data on a graph over time. So they all essentially do the same thing. They're just each kind of labeled a little differently. These plots on a graph are for rounds, or these plots on a graph are for discoveries or friction hits. Weapon equipping, weapon grabbing and releasing. So the difference would be weapon equipping is I picked up the weapon. So we'll track how many times I actually grab a thing. The grab and release is like the time that I hang on to it. Grab it, timer starts, release it, timer ends, we log that data. Use weapon would be like for a gun. Like how many times do I actually pull the trigger and use a weapon? So again, it's all just data on a graph, but we've got it kind of categorized in these different little categories here. So that's really a quick run through of the kinds of data that analytics is kind of set up to track out of the box. And we also have the ability to track maybe things that aren't listed here as well. If you guys have some of those in mind, we can talk about them and drop them in the chat. But now we'll kind of get into our code just a little bit deeper here. But first I want to catch up on chat, see what's going on over here. So Ellen the Meta says, are these use something things that Turbo tracks automatically, like AFK, Quest, etc., or options we will track later? It's both, actually. I'm pretty sure the AFK, for example, and the Quest ones, for example, I'm pretty sure that stuff is tracked automatically. But there are others like the discovery and the friction hits that we have to track ourselves. So it's kind of both. World Cube says rotation could be used to find out if the players are looking at certain thing. Yeah, like the stage, for example. Like a boat could go past and to work out if they are facing towards it. Yeah, like maybe there is an action. Yeah, that kind of gives me an idea. Maybe there's a big action that happens in the world, and it's like how many players actually turned and looked at that? Maybe potentially. So although TurboAnalytics isn't super new, in my opinion, it's super underutilized by the community. I don't know what number of people actually use this thing, but you don't hear about people talking about it a whole lot. And so I've only really personally used it in one world, and that was only when it first came out. So I've not even used it extensively. I've been doing research over the last couple of weeks and playing around with it. But a lot of this is it's still going to be trial and error. It's going to be trial and error for me. It's going to be trial and error for you. You turn these things on that you think you might want to track. You plug in these events to fire at certain times in your world that you think you might want to track. You look at that over time. You see if it gives you the information that you were expecting. If it does, great. If it don't, you go back, you tweak it a little bit, and you kind of do this iterative process over and over until you've really got what you want. Also, at any point, I want to encourage you in chat to share some things that you might want to see. Part of the effort here is to also identify gaps in the API as well. So, we can take them back to the engineers and be like, look, these are things that people also want to see. Chat says, Ellen Meta, is there a use custom if we want to track something that is not in the long list of existing ones? Yes, there is. We may have time to kind of take a look at it. I hadn't experimented with it much myself, but it is there. It does exist. World Cubes again says, could be very useful for a puzzle game to know how hard it is. That's very true. All right, so back to my scripts before we got off on the default settings. So like I said, I did create my own settings variable here. I have imported or copied over the default settings, and then I've kind of overwrote some of those settings with my own. So I decided for my world, I don't need to use game mode. I don't have any level up happening in my world. I probably actually, I don't know. We can talk about the friction thing when we look at my world a little more closely. There might be friction I might track if someone falls out of the world, potentially. That log friction hits for that. Not a whole lot else going on in this particular world, as you'll see, that kind of really requires it. I don't have any quests. I really don't have any rewards. I did turn on the use weapon equip just because I wanted to kind of play around with it and see how that works. So, I mean, in hindsight, maybe my world like isn't the most versatile world for this example, but I think it'll work for what we want to do here. Why not set everything to true? As Worlds Cubes said, yeah, to save performance. Yeah, I mean, you could set everything to true, but that's just a lot more work that the engine's going to have to do. And so best practices are only enable the things that you need. So now that I have personally defined the settings that I want to use, then we start our class. The class starts off as normal, like a regular class, right? In the start method, though, I need to make sure I register, and I need to make sure I register like this instance of the manager with the engine. It says register the component with the turbo engine and then pass in your settings. And so the register method actually returns a Boolean. It returns true if it was successively registered, or false if it was already registered. I use that to my advantage here. I create a variable called registration success. And so we know this is going to be a Boolean because it's the only thing register returns. So once register completes, this value will either be set to true or false. And then immediately I'm just going to print to the console log, hey, if registration success is true, then let me know, hey, everything was successful, tracking is now active in your world. If it's anything other than true, something went wrong, hey, registration failed, it might already be running potentially. So it's just a little thing that I did to kind of tell me, the creator, what's going on in my world. Now let's get to the events section of today's talk. So I do have a function that I created, or a method that I created here, called subscribe to events, because I plan on using this as soon as the world starts. I want to make sure I'm connected to all of the potential broadcast that I'm going to expect my manager to receive. And so that goes back up here to the top. I have to define those local events. And typically they probably should be local events, although you could send network events from a player manager or something owned by a player. I would recommend keeping those to a minimum when you can. Network events generate traffic, and also they take time. Probably best course of action is, instead of like sending maybe rapid network events from like a player manager, maybe you kind of, and this actually, we'll talk on this for just a moment. There may be instances where your logs or your tracking is something that's happened rapidly. Maybe it's rapid friction hits, maybe it's rapid discoveries the players are making. Because you can say, an example of a coin collecting world. Multiple players are running around the world and they're just collecting coins here and there, everywhere. And it's all happening quite quickly. You may not want to call a discovery every time someone picks up a coin. Instead, some of the payloads have an amount field and a number of times field that you can use. So if it's something that happens rapidly, just collect them, add them up over time, and then submit them as one payload, and increment that amount value or increment that number of times value. And that's really going to save on the amount of traffic and resources that you'll be using. And so likewise, if you do have something, try not to have something coming from a local script. Local script, I would say. If you do, just be smart about it. Don't send it super often, but those would have to be network events. But in my use case, I don't really have a whole lot coming from player side scripts. So I'm just creating local events here. I got one called discovery. So if anytime in my world I want to send a discovery event, all I've got to do is yell this discovery broadcast, and my analytics manager is going to hear that. Down here, I've connected myself to local broadcast event discovery, the one I created up top. And anytime discovery is heard, the callback is going to be a function or a method that I created. It also passes that payload that was also, so all of the events contain their specific payload. So my discovery events have a discovery made payload specifically. And so we can take a moment to kind of look at the discovery payload here. Everything except for the first option is optional, or the first parameter is optional. So you've got the discovery item key. So this is the thing that's actually going to show up in the graph when you submit a discovery. It's going to say, you're going to pick whatever it says, basically. And then you get to choose, do you want to also include discovery amount? If it was currency that they discovered, like you just want to put in how much currency maybe they found. Implied is kind of one of those things where it could really mean what you want it to mean. It's something you can filter by. What was the use case? I think let me look up real quick. You can really decide what it means for you and your world. For mine, I don't think I actually have a need for toggling on like implied, but it might suggest that there's two different ways to discover something. Essentially, it could be something that they happened upon, or it could be a thing that occurred as like the result of a series of steps that they took. And so you might toggle on implied for a case like that. And then if it's something that happens rapidly, you might add like the number of times it occurs and send it all in one payload. If the discovery resulted in a reward, like you can list the type of reward that they were given and maybe how much of that reward was earned. If there was a weapon involved in the discovery in some way, you could include a string that would help identify that weapon. WorldCube says, are weapon shooting events usually local? No, I would say not. But at some point, that event does get back to the server in some way, so you might handle it then at that point. Implied by proximity instead of direct interaction. That's a good one. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, all of the payloads for each type of event are going to be a little different. So, look at the types of data that you want to log in your world. Take a look at these different, is it something you could potentially log as a discovery? Is it something negatively impacting? You might log as friction. Is it literally leveling up, questing, or rewarding the player a thing as a result of a level up or a quest? Then you might use rewards. Are they players dealing damage to each other? Are they dealing damage to enemies, or is damage being dealt to them? Track that kind of stuff. So you're going to look at your worlds and decide, which of these events and payloads you're going to be using. Let's look at the weapon equip payload. So it's much shorter. All that you're required to submit would be the weapon key, which is basically a name to identify that specific weapon. That's all it is. You determine what that is for yourself. You're the one reading this data at the end of the day. Weapon type, again, something that you just define. It's optional though. You don't have to include that. So if you have different types of weapons in your game, just, make sure you're using the same string. If it's the same type of weapon type, you don't want multiple entries that are the same. Or is it the right hand? Like if that's information that you want to know about your world, you can send that in the payload. If you don't send it. The less you send, the less network data is actually required to log your information, which ties right back into performance at the end of the day. All right, so essentially not much else to the script now. We talked about connecting to a couple of events. We connected one to one for discoveries, the payloads coming to us over the event. We're connected to one for weapon equips. Again, the payloads coming to us through that event. And there just happened to be firing methods I created. Now here's that turbo send that I talked about earlier. So when an event is heard, when an action does occur in our world, it comes to our manager who's here to listen to all events. And then once they arrive to the manager is then going to turn around and send that to the turbo engine. The turbo engine really wants two things. It wants to know the event that you're sending and the corresponding payload, and that's it. The payloads do need to include a reference to the player. Don't forget, I think all the payloads have to have a reference to the player. But that's what I've done here. I just reached into my turbo events and I grabbed the on discovery made event to satisfy the first parameter for the send method. And then the second one was just a payload that came from our event in the first place that we sent. Let's look at an example of sending some of these payloads in some of my other scripts. So before we do that, let's kind of get some context or some backstory into these events that I'm creating anyway. So the world that we're in, this is what I call my classroom. I've had this classroom since about 2022, and it's really just a place for creators to kind of come on a weekly basis and discuss Horizon. So it's not a game. There's not a whole lot going on in here. So that's really why a lot of these features I wasn't going to turn on. But there may be some things that I might want to track here. Area is one of them, and we may have a moment to kind of set area up live. But discovery is another that I put in here, and then weapon equip was one too. But if we go through the world, there's the initial lobby area that you log into, and new animation for teleporting. So there's the lobby area, there's the hallway where I've got some clothing for sale. And so maybe I put an area trigger here to track how long people might be standing in this hallway looking at my clothing. I could literally drop area triggers here, see how long people might be staring at my signs here, or my signs here, or my leaderboards here. So I could drop a little trigger in this area and be able to track the amount of time people are spending in front of these different areas. Maybe even like, are people coming over here and looking at my doors? Like I can gather that information now with the TurboAnalytics. But once we come into the classroom, there's not much else here. People stand around a table, we talk. So chances for friction is low, and we're not leveling up, like I said. Pretty simple stuff, but I still wanted to use it to show you guys how we implement some of these things. And so one of the first things that I implemented was I actually kind of broke it and had to bring it back in. I've got this in the world. When you first come into the world, it's just a camera API example. But I thought I might use discoveries to track how many times people walk up and hit each one of these triggers. So let's take a look at that in script. So quickly refresh my memory about how this is made. I have this. So this is a local camera manager. And so I think I avoided trying to do it in the local camera manager for reasons that we talked about earlier. I just didn't want to have to send it across the network. But the triggers themselves are not local. The camera is, but not the triggers. So this is where I took advantage of the analytics. Is inside of each one of those triggers is running this script here. And this basically, they hit the trigger, it changes their camera. Pretty simple. But each one of them has a method. I'm calling a method here called send discovery broadcast with a string: first person camera, third person camera, attached camera. So I've got a unique string for each camera for each one of those triggers, right? And if we look at our send network broadcast, it's very simple. I create a variable called payload, and I defined it specifically as a discovery made payload, which is something I imported from the analytics API, because all this script was doing was just sending discovery payloads. So that's all I needed to import was my discovery payload. Go back down. So we know the payload, we know what the payload accepts. We looked at it earlier. I only really needed one thing, just a discovery key, which was the only thing that was required. Discovery key was defined as a parameter that came with the function, and that was the parameter that I passed when I called the function, right? So each one of these comes with their own unique key. Also the player, I said the player needed to be included, so I'm getting the local player. Actually, that might be a mistake. Anyway, you need to get the player in some way. So we probably should have passed the player right here. It was the player that touched the trigger. So I need to go back up here and correct all of these events to also pass that player that come with the trigger enter event. Because I think it won't act, this is actually wrong. That should have looked like that instead. And as soon as I have my payload wrapped up, I have all the information in my payload that I want. What I'm doing is sending a local broadcast, broadcasting that discovery event you saw me create over in the manager. And I'm including my payload as a parameter. So now the manager who's listening for that discovery event hears it, calls this function. The payload comes through. I immediately turn around, specify the event it's related to, and pass that payload. And now that's essentially has been logged into my world. For most of these, it's literally that simple. For the weapon equip, I have a script in here related to the NPC. There's a ball in my world. And so anytime I've got an event listening for grab events on that ball. So on grab start is being listened to. Anytime someone walks up and grabs that ball, or they walk up and grab a weapon in your world, right here under the on grab start, again, same thing as before, building my payload. This time it's a weapon equipped payload. All it wants is a key and an optional type of weapon, and if it was in my right hand or not. Only thing I cared about was that key, which I just gave it a key of ball. And then I'm sending network broadcast with the event weapon equipped and the payload and my use weapon payload. Same thing again, it's heard on the manager, it's passed to the weapon method, and then all of that is wrapped up in a turbo.send with the on weapon equipped event, turbo event, and its corresponding payload. So all of the frictions are the same way. They work the same way, determining your world where a player might run into friction that you want to track and throw one of these together just like I did with the discovery and the weapons. Remember, it's just three parts: registering, including or create your settings. Well, import, right? Determine what your settings will be, use the defaults or customize the default, register, and then you're ready to send. Build your payloads where you need to in your scripts, and then send them. Let's see, let's catch up on chat. We've got just a few minutes left here. There may be a few more things I kind of want to touch on. I spent a lot of time talking. I apologize. I hope it was somewhat useful for you. It gives you some kind of idea of how this API is, how you can use it from scratch, essentially. I did also want to take a moment to mention that if you don't want to do all that I just said manually yourself, right? There are some existing assets. So if we're looking at the public asset library, and I think literally we just have to type in the word turbo, you only get 3 results. The first one and the last one are, well, they're all really the same thing, but this one is the generic one. It doesn't come with any extra fluff. It's just the scripts that you need to communicate. It's basically a version of the scripts we just manually created. This one, the TurboAnalytics with area, comes with triggers, and it comes with area enter and area exit turbo events already kind of set up. So you could just copy those into your world and then maybe change the names and the titles of them and stuff. But there's a good example of how to use the area ones there. And then the debug one, I think it's just for debugging. Let's see. Ellen Meta says, can we see the dashboard example of how this data looks once it's already tracked? Yes. So thank you for bringing that up. That was actually something I meant to show, and I'm glad you didn't let me forget it. So let me see if I can gather up some examples I have of this data, right? So 2 things we'll look at as soon as I get it pulled up here. So I've got an example world that I was testing in, and when you're first building your analytics, you kind of want to know if they work without having to publish your world, without having to wait for players to run through your world and then wait like 2 days for that data to show up. Like, no one wants to wait 2 days to see if their scripts work. That's crazy. So they did give us the ability to kind of see it within the hour, kind of, maybe a couple hours. So let's poke around here. This is just an example world I created. I'm hoping that some of my tests are still here. So typically, if you wanted to see the analytics that you were generating in your world, you would come to the in-world tab. And all of those graphs with data would be listed through here. I've never had any in this particular world, so we don't expect to see any here. We might find some for in-world validation. No, okay. So in-world validation tab is where the debug logs will show up. So anytime, it's the last 24 hours in edit mode only. So any of the logs that you generate from edit mode should show up here within 1 to 3 hours. And so this is how you would come here to see if you're actually getting entries into TurboAnalytics. And if you're not, it might be something like your Turbo, maybe it's not registered. Maybe your payloads are malformed. Maybe you forgot to include the player in your payloads. So those are some of the issues people run into. But run some tests, trigger some events, come back in 1 to 3 hours, see if they're populated here. If they're not, might want to go back to the drawing board and see what you did wrong. If they are here, well, you know that they're working and they're going to show up when you publish the world. Let's pop over to one of my worlds that actually has some data in it. Here we go. All right, so if we look at some of the logs that I have that I'm producing. So a little bit of backstory. This is an RPG style world. There really aren't any rounds in this world. It's just kind of a sandbox, run around, do whatever you want sort of thing. So it really wasn't the type of world that TurboAnalytics was kind of designed for. It was really designed, or it's really facilitated for, or designed to facilitate games like Super Rumble, games that have a lobby, have a ready zone, have round-based combat. But just because your world doesn't have that doesn't mean you can't use TurboAnalytics to your benefit. Some of the things that I wanted to track in my RPG was like how much damage were players causing to each other. Really, one of my main concerns was how fast were people accumulating gold in my world, and what were they doing to accumulate that gold? I wanted to make sure I kept a real tight control on gold production in my world. So that was one of the things that I had put analytics in for. I recently made some updates to this world. I pulled some of the analytics out. I've not revisited analytics for this world. So although I have data here to show, it may not be the best data, and I really haven't paid a lot of attention to it lately. But let's see what some of it looks like, right? Average actions. So anytime deaths occur in my game, anytime a player is damaged in my game, anytime reward is earned, anytime there's an AFK exit or a world exit. Looks like these are the 5 events that I might be tracking on this particular graph. And see, the top one is the purple. So this is the game damage player. And according to this, like on any given day, anywhere from 44 to 6. Yeah, so like if we look at this busy day, for example, September 4th, like 2 people went AFK and exited on that day. 44 people were damaged by other players. 7 people died on that day. 4 people were rewarded currency of some kind for things that they did. And there was 1 world exit. Like, I don't know if that makes sense, right? Investigate that. Like, where did that come from? Let's look at our next one, action prevalence. Percentage of world visitors who have performed a specific action at least once. And so some of the actions were, okay, so the same set of actions essentially, right? So over here might be the number of times that action was performed. And this is like the percentage of people that performed this action, I suppose. So if we look at any given day here, 85 of them AFK. What's an AFK enter? Oh, they entered AFK. Okay, yeah, they entered 85% of the players at some point entered AFK mode. 40% of those came out of AFK. Is that potentially what that means? Maybe. Trial and error like stuff, right? Let's see. 32% of people earned rewards on that day. 98% of people entered the world. I mean, that should be 100, I would think. I don't know. Maybe some doesn't always make sense right out the gate. And maybe it's like, maybe those aren't good rewards for me to be tracking, essentially. Maybe my world it just doesn't work well in my world. I had some area triggers set up at some point. And so I had like a lobby area or a starting area where people kind of started. I had an introduction area. I had an apothecary and I had a bank at one point. So if we look, this is the percentage of visitors who visited a specific area at least once. So as far as the way my stats are set up right now, which obviously are incomplete, but I'm not getting any data from my bank or my apothecary triggers. I may have deleted them, to be honest. But wherever my world enter triggers or my lobby trigger is located, the majority of players seem to be hitting those triggers at some point during their visit. And essentially, that's what that graph's showing. It's like what percentage of players are actually hitting any specific area you've defined through your area triggers. And then the average minutes spent is like how much time do people spend in those given areas? So how many people visited those areas? How long are they spending on average in those areas? I actually don't think that's an average. I think that's a total. No, it is the average number of minutes spent by a player in a specific area. Okay, there you go. Let's see, anything else useful? Quest completion. So anytime someone completes a quest in my world, this is the percentage of world visitors who complete a specified quest on any given day. So if we look at August 19th, 21 of the people that visited on the 19th had their first death. 13% of those people on the 19th killed somebody. So a takedown, 10% or 2% of people placed a bounty. So those are kind of stats that I was able to track, because they were quests for completing those things. Dying for the first time, depositing money into the bank was a quest. 10% of people on that day did it. Rewards that were earned. So you can get rewards from killing chickens. You can get rewards from picking up coin pouches in my world. I think you can get rewards from completing quests. Oh yeah, the first takedown give you a reward. Target practice gave you a reward. And so if we look over this graph, we can see, like, what does this say? The percentage of world visitors who earned a specific type of reward. So on any given day, September 4th, 37% of people earned rewards by killing chickens. So most people are earning their rewards by shooting chickens in my world based on this graph. Like, a large number of them are actually shooting chickens, followed by collecting coin pouches that people drop. So that's useful information, I would say. And then how much reward was actually earned? So on any given day, on August 22nd, 258 coin was rewarded through coin pouches alone. So, this would be useful to balance out how money is distributed in your world, for as example. That's pretty much it. I think that, yeah, that's all I had. I do want to also real quickly touch on heat maps. If you don't have access to heat maps, it's another very useful tool that kind of came out along with the TurboAnalytics. So this is a heat map of my world. Right now you're seeing on any given day where players spend the most time. And it's actually pretty spread out, which I think is a good thing. Actually, I don't know why people are spending time like way up in the air. That's kind of weird, right? Might want to investigate what's going on there. Are people spending time under my world? No. So, ooh, maybe they are spending some time under the world. Look at that layer. So people might be finding ways to get down onto the bottom layer of the world. So something I might need to investigate, right? Some insights that I didn't know. You can also see if people are crashing in your world, like what areas in the world are people crashing from. Not a lot of crashing going on in my world. Looks like there might be some happening right here in this one spot. That's on any given day. Probably not much to worry about here, I would say. But where are people at in my world on any given week when they exit? Like, where are they exiting from? And so the red spots are telling me most players are standing in this area when they decide to exit. A lot of players are standing in this area when they decide to exit. And so that might help me understand, like, what's causing them to exit. If they're in a certain area and everyone's like heavily exiting in that area, I might want to investigate, like, what's the reasoning behind that. Thanks, guys. Thanks for coming. We'll see y'all later. Take care, everybody.